But now you've got, you know, a brand of woman who doesn't get pregnant. So you've got this little trick you can do where you can hire a woman, but they don't get pregnant because they're not actually a biological woman.
That's a topic that, unfortunately, brings us inevitably, again, to J.K. Rowling.
Again! Dude, that was very feminine.
You know, I have been a little bit stressed out with
now we're talking.
how much stuff...
Now we're talking. A bit of trans tend to polish the day off. Ideal. Let's fucking go. Now we're talking. Let's go.
Is just airing right now. We've got a bunch of stuff I'm reviewing over my secondary channel. We've got new Doctor Who, which puts videos here, which means those are even more work. And I'm still trying to maintain my Saturday schedule. It has been stressful, but honestly, I appreciate it because it's nice being able to have a Doctor Who video go up and have something fun in between all this nonsense, because next week's not going to be fun either.
Hey. Wow. Look, what? Oh my God, look at this. Would you believe it? This guy's got replaced by his sister. What are the odds? What are the odds, guys? Let's speed this up a bit. Come on.
My alternate opening joke that I was considering was part of the problem with things getting so bad in both the US and the UK at the same time is so much of my lineage is English, I can't even go back to where I came from and be okay. So there you go. You get a 2-for-1 for opening joke, question mark. But anyways, we're going to talk about what has happened in the UK recently, specifically in regards to a judgment made by the UK Supreme Court in regards to trans people. Now, there's a couple of things I want to be clear about this before I get into it. Firstly, I'm not a lawyer. And more than that, I don't really even know the fundamentals of English law. I know that in many areas there isn't that much of a difference.
Good start. So you're just freaking out about something you don't understand. Wow, sounds like very typical trans behavior, not gonna lie.
In UK and American law, but there are a lot of small nuances and differences. So I'm already out of my depth just trying to read legal stuff in the US, but I at least kind of understand the basic foundations of some of it. The UK, I'm already kind of flying blind with that. So the ruling we're going to be talking about, this happened on April 16th, and there was a 4-page press version that was put out, and then the actual judgment is 88 pages. At my best, I was never going to be able to parse all this stuff, and even if I could feel like I understood it, as I said, I don't have the base of knowledge to be confident that anything I said would actually be accurate. And that's before we deal with the fact that there is a national shortage on my freaking ADHD meds, and I've been off them for 2 weeks now, so yeah, there was no way in hell I was going to be able to successfully parse this ruling. So if you're looking for a full breakdown of the legal mechanics of this judgment, I can't give you that, and I'm not going to try. That having been said, I can tell you what I do feel very confident that I understand, what is lacking in it, some of the consequences we're already seeing, who's celebrating this, and what they intend to do next.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The fear-mongering over this decision is incredibly dumb and overblown. You know? There's absolutely no reason to be so upset about it, really, because, I mean, I understand being a bit concerned, I guess, or like uncertain or something like that. But it doesn't compromise trans people's rights. It just means that trans people, and obviously they'll say, well, this does compromise our rights because we want to be seen exactly the same as females. But it's just saying that trans women are a distinct legal category for the purposes of, you know, the like equality. They're distinct. They sit in a distinct legal category to, you know, biological women, which I think is completely correct. Correct. Of course they do. They're not literally biological women. So there's going to, of course, be some things that are going to interfere with their desire to be seen and perceived 100% as a woman at all times. You know, one of the best examples I would refer to is what prison they go into. You know, that is going to be something that's an issue and isn't as clear cut. And they're not going to get treated exactly the same as a woman, even if they've got a gender recognition certificate, which doesn't actually fundamentally change your sex. It just changes how you're perceived in some aspects of society as terms of what gender you're classified as having. Something like that is roughly what it comes down to.
All of that I can understand and that I can share with you. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about the UK when I am an American, well, I actually have a decent sized UK audience, partially because I talk about Doctor Who as much as I do, but also like it's not okay what's happening if it's anywhere. And like I don't have the spoons to talk about every single country that, you know, does some sort of thing that is restricting of trans rights or harmful for trans people, but I need to not just only do America. Like, I can't do everything. I'm only one person, but I think that I've talked plenty about what's going on here, and it's still going on, to be clear, but I have friends in the UK, and I don't want them to think that I'm not noticing what's going on over there. So, let's get into this thing. The very short version is that the UK Supreme Court unanimously decided that the 2010 Equality Act, when referring to the terms man, woman, or sex, referred explicitly and only to biological sex. Now, what this means is that any protections under the Equal Rights Act that are applied for women don't apply to trans women. Now, that's the broadest possible sense. Another little bit of context that is worth putting out there. In the UK, they do have gender recognition certificates. I might be speaking slightly out of turn on this. I think that is sort of their equivalent of like getting permission to have the data on your birth certificate changed in the US, or at least it kind of is intended to serve a similar legal means in terms of your status. I don't know if what I'm about to say is literally true, but it certainly feels like this ruling kind of renders gender recognition certificates meaningless. Now,
no, that's not true. Because if you have a gender recognition certificate, you will still be entitled to some protections under the Equality Act, because you would be recognized as a transgender individual, which would therefore entitle you to certain protections. Like, for example, you wouldn't be able to be fired if you're trans. Someone couldn't fire you because you're trans. You could take them to court for discrimination on the basis of your gender identity. I don't know what the exact term is. But yeah, you'd be protected on that basis. So it's completely false to claim that, you know, this makes that obsolete. There's still benefit and absolute reason to have one of those documents, and it would afford you certain protections, just not exactly the same protections as a woman. I don't even think you need a gender recognition certificate for that. Yeah, exactly. But the basic point is that, yeah, you know, there's still value in obtaining some legal recognition of your trans status.
That's possibly an overstatement on my part. They may serve other functions, but one of the main
to be fair,
things that they have effectively done is said, hey, regardless of what this person's gender was at birth, this is what they are recognized as now, and they should be treated accordingly in all matters, including legal. That doesn't really seem to apply anymore, at least in anything that is related in any way to the Equality Act. Because it is worth noting that this ruling, this judgment, is specifically about the application of the Equality Act. Now, that still has some far-reaching implications, but it is not a sweeping, in all matters, in all things, that trans people should always be treated and considered as the gender that they were assigned at birth, what they are calling biological sex. It's not quite that far-reaching, but it is pretty far-reaching in a way that I don't feel comfortable trying to parse, because again, I don't know enough about how many facets of life over there the Equality Act actually touches. I'd imagine it's a lot, but I don't have a breakdown, and I'm not going to be able to wrap my head around it. Now, while, as I said, I am not prepared
to be fair, I was, you know, very skeptical. They're being fairly reasonable here. They seem to be accepting lack of knowledge in certain places. I mean, I don't fucking know the ins and outs of this either myself. So yeah, that's reasonable that they're willing to not be 100% on it, sure.
Try and parse 88 pages of legalese based on a system that I don't actually know very well, and I can only barely say I kind of understand the American system. Again, not a lawyer. But I can't...
Yeah, I think, you know, doing a specific video on it and then calling it trans rights in the UK just got set back decades. You know, I get this clickbait or whatever, fine, but like it just seems a bit of an odd decision rather than, I don't know, not doing that, I guess. I don't know. It just comes across like fear-mongering, exactly.
I can tell you that there were a few scant things that I do feel comfortable kind of pointing out about the ruling. I am going to pull this from the full judgment, not the press summary, because I want to be as accurate as I can. The first is how they define biological sex, which is really thinly. Under terminology, they say that biological sex is basically just sex assigned at birth, and that's it. And that is not a lot to go on.
Well, how the fuck else are we supposed to determine what someone's biological sex is? That's how it works. You get observed as having a certain sex at birth, and that's that.
I know that for certainly the TERFs and the gender critical movement, they always like to pretend like it's all very simple. But if you actually stop and think about what this means as a practical matter, this is so simple as to be unhelpful and harmful and definitely limiting. Here's what I mean by that. When we say sex assigned at birth, that is just a doctor looking at a newborn's genitals and making their own determination. It is literally just the doctor's best guess. A doctor that may be overworked and might have to be rushing off to go do something else.
Bro, what? Dude, what are you on about? What are you on about? What? It's not... Bro, these people have never had children, I feel like, so they don't understand. Like, it's quite a simple process, okay? You literally look and see is there something there or isn't there? Right? Let's not, it's talking about babies. Bit weird to think about. But obviously, this is what you experience. You literally just look at the genitals of the baby and you say, and that's it. What do you mean overworked? What an absolutely bizarre concept. An overworked doctor is going to get it meaningfully wrong. It's complete nonsense. And also, the way that it works, I don't, in the US, can't speak exactly, but the process that you go through means that it's fairly difficult that an overworked doctor would get it wrong. You have the baby weighed, they fill out a document, they inspect, they have to look the baby over. Right, when you have a baby, they look at the baby and inspect the baby, they count the fingers, they count the toes, they've got to make sure there's no birth defects and things like that. So it's not like a doctor is going to, and normally it'd be a nurse that does this, I would presume anyway, doctor signs it off, or whatever.
Off depressed people.
Chud's doctor had to use a magnifying glass. Wow.
Thank you for the super chats. And the only time this isn't going to apply is if a baby has got a disorder of sexual development, but those are exceptionally rare and affect less than 0.1% of the conversation or something. Very, very low percentage. In the vast, vast, vast majority of cases, okay, the observation at birth is going to be correct, and that's the sex that you're going to identify with through your entire life, okay? So it's complete cope to act like this is some ridiculously complex thing and doctors are going to get it wrong repeatedly. It's not the case. It's complete bullshit. Something that is said to justify this, bizarre idea that it's not something that's observed and it's something that is just assigned,
A doctor who is human, and humans make
And
mistakes.
also, yeah, they tell you before birth, they can figure out what sex your baby is before they're born even. Ridiculous.
Just statistically. But even setting that aside, some people have ambiguous genitals at birth or are intersex in some way. But the terminology that the court is using, as they define it within this judgment, does not make a single mention.
In 99% of cases, probably more than that, I would think, that's not the case. The vast majority of cases, that just is not the case. Total fucking trans cope.
Complicating factors of sex assignment. Things like, for instance, chromosomes, which are not mentioned once in this entire document. So what this is basically saying is, based off one person's at-a-glance determination, that is what you will be for the rest of your life, no matter what. Just think about that for a second. No matter how much you trust doctors, no one is perfect, no profession is perfect, and some people do not have a straightforward situation that you could just get at a glance. And yet,
so what are they on about? That's so rare. It's so rare that that's the case. That's like a genital defect, disorder thing. That's exceptionally rare. What is this person on about, dude?
whatever was put on a document, based off just looking from one person, is going to be what you're stuck with for the rest of your life. Regardless of whether or not there are more complicating factors, regardless of whether or not your chromosomes actually don't match your genitals, which does in fact happen. Because another term that is not in the entire document is intersex. There is not a single mention, and unless I am missing something, it really seems like from a legal perspective, again, at the very least in regards to the Equality Act, intersex people functionally don't exist. They need to be considered as either a man or a woman, regardless of what is actually going on with them. And now, the term non-binary does appear twice within that document, but only to state...
Yes, because the vast majority of society is structured around the male-female split, which is the norm, which is fine, works. We don't need to fucking consider intersex exactly. There's always going to be a fringe aspect that's going to require a more tailored angle on this. But for the vast majority of people, this is going to be fine, acceptable, and going to work.
That it won't be regarded because the UK does not issue gender recognition for non-binary identities, nor do they honor ones that are issued by other countries.
And also, intersex people will fit within this. And of course, there's going to be complexities with fringe cases. If you've got someone with some crazy defect, yeah, it's going to be difficult to figure out exactly the right legal aspect to it, regardless of what that is. But it doesn't mean that there's not a vast majority that this applies to, and totally no issue.
And again, I cannot stress enough, this is a massive, sweeping alteration and restriction and just change in terms of the legal standing of trans people. And it all comes down to one person wrote this down on a paper however many years ago, and now you are stuck with it no matter what. So there is zero scientific basis for the court's classification of biological sex as being sex determined at birth, because when it's written down on your birth certificate, they're not testing your chromosomes. It's not based off anything other than observation of your exterior genitalia.
That's because most of the time you don't need to do that. In like 99 point whatever percent of cases, you don't need to do that because the genitalia links to the chromosomal sex that you are.
Of course, chromosomes are a complicating factor because it's not just XY and XX. There are quite a few variations that can happen. And the court considers none of this because if they actually considered the real science behind sex and gender...
Also, if there are defects and issues, I'm fairly certain that they would then go ahead and perform that test. But, you know, presumably there's no need to perform a test if in the vast majority of cases the genitals match the sex. And if you do have a situation where there's uncertainty or there's some defect, then you would do the test and then you'd figure out from there. And the variations are like, yeah, you know, I can't remember the figure. I'm pretty sure it's like 0.1% or something. Like less than that. I don't fucking know. It's like a fucking tiny figure in comparison to the broad number.
They wouldn't have been able to make this kind of sweeping judgment, which is why I'm putting so much emphasis on this, even though the majority of transgender people are not intersex so far as the data shows. In order to apply this overly broad binary view of sex, they have to disregard an entire kind of person and pretend they don't exist. So we're already off to a really bad start. Now, as I said, this ruling technically only affects the interpretations of the Equality Act. So as I said, protections for women will not apply to trans women and protections for men won't apply to trans men. So if, for instance, a trans woman is harassed or discriminated against on the basis of being a woman, which many trans women are perceived as, they have no protection for that. Because as far as the Equality Act is now concerned, regardless of how you now look, regardless of how you are now perceived, regardless of how other people treat you.
Okay, that's ridiculous. But then there would be some way in which you would have, you know, your gender identity. I can't remember the exact terminology of it, to be fair.
But how do I make money off depressed people?
And prime example of how the far left want to bring the fringes into the middle. Supposed to work from the exceptions out according to them.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Thank you for the super chat, Caleb. And PD, thank you for the super chats.
Chud, just finished seeing Gay Riddler cover that game YouTuber Sungrand Studios aka Gerald being a pathological liar. Will you cover that drama, Chud?
Okay,
maybe. No idea what it is,
but
possibly.
How do I make money off
Thank you,
people?
PD, for
Aydin
that.
Paladin became a member.
Aydin, thank you for the membership.
Paladin celebrates 14 months of membership. I'm good friends with an actual intersex person. The prevalence of all intersex is about 0.0508. Under 1%.
Thank you for the membership. I don't believe this to be true. I'm fairly certain that you are still afforded protections as a trans individual. So you could still categorize that abuse under the Equality Act for your trans status. And also, I think that there's some aspect there where if you're like, I don't want to speak further than that. I know that there's still protection under your trans status. So you would still, like, for example, if someone fired you for, you know, being a woman, I mean, obviously this is quite new, so you don't know how it's going to play out. But if someone fired you for being a woman as a trans woman, there would still be some cause for, under the Equality Act, to have some protection on that basis under your trans identity. I'm pretty sure, like 90% sure. Obviously, I'm not a legal expert, I'm not a legal scholar, but the point is that you are still afforded protections. It's just that there's certain protections that are afforded to women, like being able to go into a female prison, that would not be afforded to you, more than likely, because of your distinct legal status as a trans woman rather than a biological woman.
You're a man. And so if you are getting, you know, harassed, treated, mistreated, or discriminated against based off the fact that you clock as a woman, you don't have protection for that because, well, you're not a woman, so you don't get those protections.
That's
of
just
course,
false.
that is not to imply that only people who quote unquote pass are
Yeah, I'm like 90%, 95% sure that's a completely false information and they're just fear-mongering at that point.
entitled to rights. That's absolutely not the case, and I don't want you to think that that's what I'm saying, but it is worth noting that there are trans women who look like this.
Okay, I'll give you Hunter Shea for sure, but nah, come on. Give me a fucking break with this. You serious? No way. Bullshit.
And as a result, will be treated by most people as a woman, but they will have none of the protections that a woman assigned that at birth would have. In terms of practical matters for the kind of stuff that can happen, well, it's hard for me to extrapolate out. Like I said, I don't know how many different aspects of life the Equality Act touches, but what I can give you is an example of something that was already changed. In fact, it changed almost immediately after the ruling came down. And that is the arrest and search policies for the transport police. They amended their strip search policy, which previously had women officers handling both cis and trans women, and men officers handling both cis and trans men. Now, as it is, a trans woman, regardless of possession of a gender recognition certificate, and regardless of her current physical appearance, state, or even what genitals she currently is in possession of, will be strip searched by a man. And please keep in mind, these are not prisoners, and this is not about what jail people get sent to. These aren't necessarily even people who are actually guilty of anything, because an arrest does not automatically equate to guilt.
I mean, there could be some complexity here, sure. That it could be some complexity. I think I can accept that, you know, I can understand a concern here. Like if you're a significantly passing trans woman, getting searched by a male officer could be distressing. There's probably some edge case there that needs to be thought about and considered. But if you're like, we're thinking about this, the idealized trans individual that passes perfectly as a woman, where many trans people don't. And so you're doing like, this is where it starts to get tricky. You start to deal with the actual cases, and it's not this, you know, perfect passing per thing. It is more so like a fella in a frock. So what happens then? What happens if you got a dude that looks like obviously, it as horrible as it sounds, it would make more sense that then a male officer would search them because they align in terms of appearance, strength, potentially, if they haven't been put on any sort of hormones or haven't been on hormone therapy that long or whatever, of an actual male. So yeah, this is the reality. This is the complexity of it. If you got someone that has not meaningfully, you know, progressed down a pathway of transition, I can easily see an argument as to why it would make sense that a male ought to search them. As difficult and complex as that can get, as you get closer to those, you know, lines of when someone passes and whatnot, it is complicated. But then the other way is like you can have someone that claims to be a woman who is just a bloke that's put a dress on and has only just started transitioning, that's still got all the fucking strength, etc. of a male, getting searched by a woman. That seems like a bad solution too to me.
By a man. And please keep in mind, these are not prisoners, and this is not about what jail people get sent to. These aren't necessarily even people who are actually guilty of anything, because an arrest does not automatically equate to guilt. And again, this change happened almost instantly. Now, naturally, this is also going to bring about the enforcement of what gender criticals have claimed to want for a long time, which is the idea of single-sex spaces. This has been at the heart of so many gender critical and TERF talking points from the beginning, but especially in the UK.
Yeah, these people cannot conceive of life without any sort of hardship or uncomfortability. It's like, it is very frustrating that it feels like the entirety of our society and law has got to shift around them, despite the fact that they are in the minority. And it's not like talking about having a seat at a restaurant. We're talking about intimate searches, right? If you were saying, I as a trans person should not be forced to sit in a certain part of a restaurant or something, yeah, sure, I'd agree with that. Fair enough. But, you know, they try and invoke sometimes this idea of like the civil rights movement and stuff. But it's like, that's the kind of stuff that they were talking about. You're talking about, you know, thinking that you are entitled to be searched by a female officer, even if you look like a fella that stuck a dress on yesterday. Nasty. I know it sounds nasty, but that, I think, is the reality of it.
But of course, the talking point is always about we're keeping men who just say that they're transgender out of women's spaces like bathrooms, lockers, etc. And they may claim that this does that, but it doesn't. Not really. Because first of all, it is going to force trans men, some of whom look like this, into women's spaces. And if you think that that's going to go over all people...
So yeah, again, I mean, this is literally the, you know, woke version of would you rather fuck Buck Angel or equivalent trans porn star that passes, you know? It's like we're looking at the extremes of it and we're pointing to that. Yeah, obviously they look like fellas and I would say they should go into the male toilet, right? Sure.
But how do I make
But
money off
many
the
trans
people?
men don't look like that.
It's my Beso sending you some dosh. This is a big W for the UK and it's very telling that this one action has such a reaction.
Thank you for the super chat. Thanks, Jed. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Keen, it's not for anybody, not for the trans men, not for the gender critical people, not just for people who are just trying to use the spaces normally, and suddenly somebody with a full beard and who's balding is in there and having to say, I'm sorry, the law says I have to be here, which is the other thing. The scenario that they're always throwing out, that conservatives, gender criticals, and TERFs are always saying, I was like, oh, some guy can just claim that he's trans and just walk on in there. Well, you know what's going to happen now, at least will happen as much as that ever happened, which for the record is almost
for that
never.
comment.
But if we're dealing with hypotheticals, let's be upfront.
I'm
This doesn't
called
fix
out.
that problem, because now those same men who want to creep on women that you are convinced trans women actually are, but those same people can just stroll in and go, oh, I was assigned female at birth. I'm supposed to be in here. So this doesn't even fix their surface level thing that they claimed was what they were fighting for, but it never was. Now, to be clear and fair and balanced, trademark Some More News, the Equality Act does actually say you are not permitted to discriminate against someone who has had gender reassignment and has their gender recognized as having changed, basically has a gender recognition certificate. You are not actually allowed to discriminate them on that basis. But of course, you can only discriminate against somebody for being trans if you know they're trans, which brings us right back to what we were talking about before, which is be they trans man or trans woman, anyone who clocks and looks like the gender that they in fact are, but who is being treated as such by another person, and that person is discriminating them on the basis of, well, you're a woman and I'm being misogynistic to you and I'm treating you poorly for that. Trans people wouldn't have those protections. And it's only going to apply if it's clear that the other person even knows that they're trans.
That's not true. That is not just not true. I would be extremely surprised if a trans woman was discriminated against for being a woman, and that wouldn't then fall foul of some sort of discriminatory, practice, regardless of whether or not they're actually a woman. I don't believe that's how it's set up to work. Like, you'd still be offered protection under the Equality Act, even if it fell under this, gender recognition aspect. I having looked at this, and I'm no expert, don't get me wrong, this seemed to be more about the governing of single-sex spaces and things like that, rather than, we're making it so that if you're a trans woman and someone fires you for being a woman, you're not going to be able to claim discriminatory practices. Well, you still will be able to under the same Equality Act. Right?
Of course, this is a group that insists we can always tell, which
or is a trans woman an acceptable person to put in place and claim equality because you've got a trans woman in place? Or is that, because that's, I think, what the original case was about. It's about the idea that a trans woman can be representative of woman if you're trying to push for equality quotas or something like that.
demonstrably not true. Follow Mia Moore over on Twitter for prime examples of why that's absolutely not the case. But you know what? I'm sure for some people, the fact that the Equality Act says you can't discriminate against someone just because they're trans means that this doesn't really even change anything. This isn't really a problem. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. This is just clarifying some stuff. It's just clearing up some confusion. You still have protections under.
Yeah, exactly. Because, obviously this is getting a bit, I'm not sure this is exactly how it's always going to work, for example. But you, as an example, as an employer, could hire a trans woman. You could tick the box for diversity on hiring a woman, but then you wouldn't have to be concerned about things like maternity leave, which is the whole point of women. This is the thing. Women had to push for equality in the workplace because the perception was they get pregnant and fuck off, and that would be a negative to the company. But now you've got, a brand of woman who doesn't get pregnant. So you've got this little trick you can do where you can hire a woman, but they don't get pregnant because they're not actually a biological woman. So women have pushed for this right, and then there's a new breed of women that come along that claim they're women, but they're not actually women, and then that's still diversity. Well, it's not, because you're hiring them as a workaround to get around the fact that a biological woman would, has rights that they've pushed for off the back of the pregnancy and their biological basis, etc. Something like that, something along those lines, I think.
Equality Act. What are you even complaining about? Well, first of all, that entire line of thought has the exact same tone and flavor as the right-wing grifters in the US who kept saying that Roe v. Wade being overturned wouldn't actually change anything.
So Roe v. Wade overturning means that Colorado, can have abortions like they have all the way up until 9 months, and Texas can have a heartbeat bill.
Yeah.
So again, it's going to be let 1,000 flowers bloom. It's going to be each state gets to decide on its own specific abortion protocols, which is precisely what the Constitution suggested at the time.
Most abortions now, even when you go to a clinic, are done with the pill.
Yeah.
The pill. And pills are easy to get in America. We know that.
They were lying too. Of course it was a big deal. They knew it was a big deal, and you could tell they knew it was a big deal by who was celebrating it. Which, that's a topic that, unfortunately, brings us, inevitably, again, to J.K. Rowling.
Again! Dude, that was very feminine, very feminine.
He decided to do a little victory lap with this skin-crawling tweet. And you know what? I wish I could appreciate the irony of the fact that he's pulling a quote and a little bit of a pose that is inspired by a character made famous by an actor who is alleged to have ensured
look, I find it a bit tasteless to do stuff like that, okay? However, with J.K. Rowling in particular, she has been the subject of the most deranged hatred I've ever fucking seen online, I feel like.
But how do I make
so I'm
money
gonna let that pass, I
We
think.
should allow those who pass in society, none of them.
Thank you for the super chat. Okay, that's bad. I disavow. Yeah. People have been at her throat for fucking years. And yeah, I get she's mean sometimes and stuff, but a lot of it is overblown on the basis, particularly of original comments, which was pointing out that sex is important. So yeah, I get it. I get why she feels like celebrating in that way.
his female co-star from the first season was fired because he wanted all men in leading roles for that damn show. But this whole thing's too gross for me to even appreciate that with an ironic chuckle. And make no mistake, this should be taken very literally. She is taking credit, and this was a plan. She helped fund the lawsuit brought by 4 women in Scotland that brought this case to the Supreme Court in the first place. She put 70,000 pounds, nearly $100,000 US, into their coffers for them to be able to bring this suit. She funded this, and she's taking credit for it publicly. So first of all, I never want to hear again how supporting Harry Potter does not directly fund transphobia, because this is what your Harry Potter money bought. But the thing is, this gross tweet.
Good, I bought 20 copies of that game you fucking hated just to make this happen, actually.
Point that I want you all to internalize. It is important, now probably more than ever, to realize, appreciate, and understand. Laws change because people organize and have a plan.
Wonderful.
The law is malleable, and if you know how to come at it...
Demon mama looking rough thesis days.
I disavow, but thank you very much for the $10.
And have the backing to do so, you can change it. And that, in and of itself, is kind of neutral because it can be done in either direction. Every single protection and benefit you currently enjoy exists because people fought for it and had a plan on how to achieve it. Weekends, overtime, child labor laws, the Civil Rights Act, women's right to vote, all of it only exists because people planned and worked. And I really feel like way too many of us have lost sight of that. There's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, the arc of the moral universe
oh my
is long,
God,
but it bends towards
always with the blacks. Oh, let me just mention the blacks again. Just like, basically, pushing for trans rights is just like what the blacks were doing.
Justice. And I think he's right. But I think he's right for reasons too many of us have forgotten, if we ever understood it. I think that when he said that, he understood that with continued work, for all the struggles and how long it takes, we will make progress. It will bend in the correct direction with the pressure being applied. But I think too many people, or at the very least too many people in privileged positions, have a tendency to see a quote like that and think, oh, well, the arc of the moral universe just bends toward justice. It's just headed there on its own. That'll take care of itself, won't it? No. No, it won't. I have said before that part of the reason the right has regained so much ground is because they have never lost sight of the fact that this is a fight. All of these are battlegrounds, and they have never stopped treating it like a fight.
Fight like you mean it.
But a whole bunch of the rest of us did. Far too many, who are people who don't want to see rights reversed or revoked, are acting like, well, it's a finished issue. Once the right is secured, you can relax. It'll always be there. It's in the law books now. We don't have to worry about it. No, you have to fight to keep whatever rights and privileges and benefits that you have to fight to keep them just as much as people fought to get them for you in the first place. And we are currently living in the reality that exists when you don't bother to do that. We are watching the rollback of queer rights, not just trans people. It won't stop there. We are seeing child labor laws be discussed being rolled back in places like Florida. Everything can be undone if you do not defend it. And make no mistake, it does not stop at trans people. It was never going to stop at trans people.
Who's next?
I know some people are going to say this is hyperbolic. No, let's actually talk in detail about the next target that UK TERFs have already picked.
Okay.
As a case study, we're going to look at Jess Gill. Now, Ms. Gill is the founder of Women's Safety Initiative in the UK. And right after the ruling, she tweeted out
this.
We've won the battle against trans ideology. Now it's essential that the gender-critical community speaks up about the dangers of mass immigration for women.
Oh no! Don't go after all the immigrants, bro. Okay, listen. Okay, I'm not like as anti-immigrant as some of you want me to be. Okay. But who do you think... I mean, obviously, the fucking lefties, sure, I'm going to be incensed by this, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that are like, yeah, good, we fucking sick of these immigrants.
Women and girls are being raped and harassed across the country. If you truly care about women's safety, you need to speak out against this.
So sorry. Oh, my cat is here. He's concerned by that voice. I keep up.
An instant pivot from protect us from men in our spaces to protect us from immigrants. Barely a pause, barely a breath, instant shift.
You're using
a mocking, always going to happen.
Using a mocking voice about women being raped. Yeah, not the best look, is it?
And just to make the point, let's actually examine that sign being held up in the middle right there. The one that says 1 in 4 sex crimes is committed by foreign nationals. Let's set aside for the moment citation needed on that statistic. Let's, for the moment, take it at face value. Who are the other 3 out of 4? 75% are not done by immigrants.
Oh my God, dude. And what percentage of the population are represented by immigrants? God, per capita is like their fucking kryptonite, isn't it, dude?
Or foreign nationals. You are provably going after a minority, not just an ethnic or racial or social minority.
Stupid,
you are singling out the minority of offenders. Even if that number is real, you have made it your priority to try and stop immigrants who are at most a quarter of the problem. And what's more, even if that number is real, they are ignoring what percentage of actual immigrants or foreign nationals are committing any kinds of crimes at all. They picked out a specific crime so they could pull a percentage, and they're using it as a proposal to stop immigration as a whole, deliberately ignoring what a small percentage of immigrants or foreign nationals are committing any degree of crime.
Well, they're probably pointing that one out because they're concerned with sex crimes against women, one would presume, I think. And also, I'm not sure we want to get into the stats either, because, well, obviously, per capita, that starts to look pretty rough. Let's put it that way.
Crimes, or how many are women or children, but it's just saying we have to stop all of them, because that's always the point. If you actually cared about the safety of women, why would you do this? Why would this be your approach? Of course, the 75%, the 3 out of 4, those are red-blooded Englishmen, and she has no interest in getting rid of them. She practically says as much. Unless you think that this is an out...
Well, no, because we have got an absolute right to be here, without question, as an indigenous population in these lands. Us indigenous rapists are allowed to remain no matter what, okay? But the point is, if you're bringing people in that are committing these crimes, right, you're potentially increasing the risk to women. So even if you disagree with it, you can at least understand in good faith the argument that they're trying to make here, surely.
Outlier and just a her problem. Let us not forget that Kelly J. Keane Minshall has regularly had neo-Nazis supporting her at her events, and 2 years ago, a woman at a gender-critical rally literally quoted Mein Kampf into a microphone while justifying her stance against trans people. These are not outliers. This is the movement. And if they feel like they've won, they're not going to disperse and go home and put their feet up no matter how many selfies holding cigars J.K. Rowling puts out. They are going to do what fascists always do, which is to move on to their next target. Whether Jess Gill pivoted now because she thinks they've actually won, or because she wants to just harness the momentum of a win to push on to the new issue, it doesn't really matter. Her pivot from transphobia to xenophobia is emblematic and is one much of the gender critical movement has already made, and I expect we'll see a large pivot in this direction from their biggest figureheads. Rowling already decided to start swiping at asexuals, which I talked about in this video. Why would she stop there? It hasn't really cost her anything after all, and these are her friends now. This judgment is emblematic of TERF thinking. It takes the, I'm sorry, no matter how much you think it's simple, quite complicated subject of sex and boils it down to what one person thought they saw and wrote down on a piece of paper. Okay. It ignores science, it ignores humanity, it's trying to force a complex world to take the shape of a simple one. That
I mean, if what they're saying is true and they get it so wrong, why do we not have significant issue with people being misidentified? Why is there not like countless times where people are like, oh, like me, someone that looks like me coming forward and going, oh man, they got it really wrong and they said that I was female on my birth certificate. I need to get that fixed. Like, it's just not a common thing that happens. You know, I would challenge anyone to name, you know, even, 5 people in their life that's happened to. Can you name 5 people that you know that's happened to? I couldn't name one personally, but just, 5. Let's make it 5. It's just not a common thing that it's wrong. The sex you observed as having at birth is, 99 point whatever % of the time, the sex that you will then go on to identify with and be, and have the correct chromosomal thing of that you then end up going through puberty as.
To what they want. And Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the head of the supposedly left-leaning Labour Party, has already embraced the movement wholeheartedly. And not just in the usual mealy-mouth, oh, well, we'll abide by the court's ruling kind of way that you get from Democrats in the US. No, he actually called it a welcome step forward. The trans community in the UK are effectively without political allies, at least not from the 2 major parties. They are both against trans people right now in the UK. And I cannot even...
They are both against trans people. You got no fucking idea what you're talking about, dude. You're totally clueless on this topic. You don't know or understand the inner workings of the Labour Party. There's plenty of fucking pro-trans stuff in the Labour Party. Keir Starmer's the Prime Minister, sure. But there's plenty of like progressive MPs who would be pro the trans stuff and probably don't like the decision. But the point is the Prime Minister has got to, go along with what the Supreme Court says. He can potentially put in place or suggest legislation to push forward in order to reverse this or change this. But the complexity of doing that at the moment, the political capital that you'd spend doing that, is just, unfortunately, not worth it. And if you disagree with that, you do not understand the absolute fucking, precipice of reform raping that Labour are on the cusp of at the moment. So, yeah, very, very obvious lack of knowledge about the complexities of the current UK political situation.
Begin to express my frustration, my fear, my sympathy for what is happening over there. And I know that I've already asked that you look into supporting trans folks in the US, but if you are in the UK, you should be focusing locally because you've got plenty of problems over there. And if you are in a position to help and you're not in the UK, well, here's some organizations to consider supporting.
Better off if we just laughed at these people every time they opened their putrid, lying mouths.
Okay. Okay. I disavow.
This is not a comprehensive list, but it's a start. And in the meantime, all we can do is
thank you for the $5.
Do our best to find the people who actually support us, support them in turn, get people who don't either actively want to see us wiped off the face of the earth, or will be happy to stand by and let it happen into office. But
bro, I just sat down. What the FK is that?
A beautiful woman, of course. Thank you.
All this takes time. It's still worth doing. This is the planning. This is the groundwork that the right and gender criticals and TERFs and fascists have been doing pretty much out in the open for the last few decades. We've just been letting it happen. We can plan too. We can work to fix this too, but it's not going to be quick and it's not going to be easy. And if you yourself or your loved ones are trans and you need to get away and get somewhere where you feel safer, I really hope that you have the means and the ability to do that. And in the meantime, as bad as things are here, I'm not.
Supreme Court overrules Parliament with rulings. No. But that is based on the current Equality Act as it exists. If they wanted to, they could put in place or propose new legislation that would... You could literally put in place legislation that argues or says and overrides that and says, no, actually trans women are women. But they're not going to want to do that. I'm fairly certain that's the case. It's not the same as the US, exactly. We don't have, it's not like that's the Constitution and is unwavering. You can put in place new legislation to reverse that if you wanted to. I'm pretty sure.
I'm not going to pretend that they're okay over there. And it's compounded by everything. It's compounded by people like Rowling. It's compounded by the BBC. It's compounded by now both the Labour and the Tory party. Much like what's happening in the US. While that is where I make my home and where I was born, grew up, and have made my own family, I'm not going to just sit back while the country that 400 years ago my family originated from, because yeah, I've got ancestors came over on the God's damned Mayflower.
Something went wrong along the way.
But I am no more comfortable seeing my country of origin for both sides of my family.
This is hysterical,
being
man.
pulled apart and infected with this than I am the country that my family has been here since before the founding of. It's all a disaster. And I needed to say something. Sorry that this is depressing. And like I said, next weekend's video is not going to be any lighter. It's also not something I ever wanted to talk about again, but we'll burn that bridge when we
Question mark.
In the meantime, I really, really hope that you are able to take care of yourselves, your loved ones, and be safe out there. There's the usual stuff. Yes, I have a Patreon. Yes, I have YouTube memberships, all that. Look, it's all down in the description.
Come on, give me the Dory news. I'm getting genocided over here.
Because what I really want you to remember is that you are
beautiful. Oh my God, that's a horrible comment. The hormones are not working on this person, I'm afraid. That is horrendous. I can't believe you just said that.
You are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.
Thank you.
And now to thank my high supporting patrons.
I absolutely love this image. Very generous. Very generous image here, isn't it? Yeah, this is exactly what I look like, in fact. This stylized image of me as a woman is precisely what I look like. Yeah, obviously, obvious hysterical bullshit. Very clear hysterical nonsense. Tragic. The lightsaber. There we go, guys. That was much better than the VTuber tent we were trying to wrangle our way through, wasn't it? That was diabolical. Diabolical. Okay, guys, right. Thank you very much, as always, for swinging by. Much appreciated. Any more Shelbo? I don't know, man. I've not checked up on shelves.